So welcome, my name is Hilary Inwood. So happy to have everybody here. We will remind you today that we're being recorded to please make sure that you've got your microphones muted unless you're going to be speaking. It's just a way to keep the background noise down, which is fantastic. We're really happy to welcome you here today for Counting on Math, Taking Math Outside. This is part of a partnership we have between the Toronto District School Board's Eco Schools Program and Sustainability Office in conjunction with the Sustainability and Climate Action Network at OASI. This is a long-standing partnership, and we are always thrilled to be working with the team at the TDSB. May I introduce you to Jen Vetter and to Chris Metropolis, who are here from the TDSB, part of the Eco Schools staff. And I'd also like to introduce you to Sarah Urquhart and Lise Kennedy, who are part of the team at OASI, who pull all these events together. So if you haven't done the entrance poll yet, please do that. We'll be thrilled to continue to collect information on who's in the room as we go through. And we are going to be referencing TOES today, and that is the Toronto Outdoor Education Schools, part of the Toronto District School Board. And we're very pleased to welcome David Hucker-Budlowski here today, who is the Central Coordinating Principal for TOES. So we always start with a land acknowledgement and a little bit of an overview. So let me give you the overview first, and then we'll do the land acknowledgement second. We have four amazing speakers who I'll introduce you to just before we get underway. Laura Thompson, Rachel Wagner, Wesley Craine, and Stefanie Hall from the TOES team. We're so pleased to have them here. And we have been doing art-based land acknowledgements to introduce you to the voices, broadly spoken, of Indigenous artists and Indigenous peoples as a way to center these sessions. We know that land acknowledgements are not the be it and end all. It's really just the little reminder for all of us to center Indigenous education, center Indigenous ways of knowing and knowledge systems in the work that we are doing in education these days. So I'd like to introduce you to the work of Lynette Lafontaine. Lynette's work, as you can see, is beaded, and I purposefully chose that one today. I always think of beading as a form of visual math in many ways because of the patterning that's involved in it. And Lynette's work very beautifully brings together aspects of nature as well as patterning in her work. So let me just tell you a little bit about Lynette before we do our land acknowledgement. Lynette Lafontaine is a Métis, two-spirit, mixed media visual artist who uses traditional and contemporary materials and knowledge in their work. Their spirit name roughly translates as Bear Buffalo Northern Lights Woman. Lynette's roots are in northern Saskatchewan, as well as the historic Métis communities of the Red River Settlement in Norway House. Their work is inspired by connection to land, heart, and spirit, and their ancestors' teachings from elders and knowledge holders, excuse me. Through independent learning and mentorships, Lynette has learned beading, moccasin making, whitefish scales, hide tanning, and toughening art, as well as traditional materials, design, and other identifying Métis cultural elements. So this is just a beautiful piece. With that, I'm just going to give the TDSB's
in progress.
We acknowledge that we're hosted on the lands of the Mississaugas of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat. We also recognize the enduring presence of all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing screen just for a minute. We encourage you, if you would like, to introduce yourself in the chat if you've just joined us. And I'm going to introduce you to our four panelists from the TOES team. So I'd like to introduce you to begin to Laura Thompson, who's been a teacher with the TDSB for almost 20 years. She's taught everything from grade 3 to grade 8, STEM, visual arts, and lots of math. She's currently in her third year with the TDSB's outdoor education team, acting as a site supervisor at the Etobicoke Outdoor Education Center. She has a lifelong passion for outdoors and adventure sports and is thrilled to be able to combine her love of experiential learning and outdoors through her work with the TDSB. I'd also like to introduce you to Wesley Craine, who's been a teacher with the TDSB for 12 years. He's an outdoor enthusiast for his whole life. His passion is to engage students in experiential learning, outdoors, and to foster passion for the natural world. Third on the panel today is Rachel Wagner, who's a TDSB outdoor education specialist, currently supporting students in programming at Monocliff's Outdoor Education Center, the Etobicoke Outdoor Education Center, as well as Sheldon Center for Outdoor Education. You must be a very busy person on the roads these days, Rachel, going back and forth between those sites.
Yeah, it's a new adventure every day.
There you go. She's an OCT certified teacher specializing in the primary, junior, and intermediate divisions and has experience working as kindergarten outdoor education and STEM teacher within the TDSB. And then finally, we're pleased to welcome back Stefanie Hall, who has actually just worked on the last webinar with us, which was a focus on environmental racism. Stefanie has been a geography, science, and ESL teacher in the TDSB and joined TOES in 2019 as a secondary teacher at Forest Valley. Her background in environmental studies has framed her enthusiasm for place-based and experiential learning opportunities for youth to engage in stewardship and climate action work. So with that, I'll just give a huge welcome to the TOES team. So pleased to have you here for this webinar.
Thanks, Hillary. Okay, so just give us a second while we get our presentation organized. Stefanie is going to be sharing slides with you, and everyone who's in the room and who registered will get the slides sent to them in an email. So you don't need to take notes or anything like that. I think we can fast forward a little bit to the Jamboard if we have the question up. Can we get the next slide? Okay, so one of the things that really stood out to me when I did my math specialist was how much the teacher attitude towards teaching math impacted student success. And so we want to take a minute and just, we did a little poll about who's in the room in terms of, you know, your divisions and your teaching assignments, but we'd love to know attitudinally how you feel about teaching math. So if everyone can click on the link, I think it's going to be in the chat. We've got little dots on the Jamboard and some images. And if you can put a dot where it's sort of a where you feel you sit towards teaching math. Do we have an image of the Jamboard? So we can maybe see what real time where people are putting their dots. So just take a quick minute if you can go in and sort of self-identify in terms of your attitude towards teaching math. Okay, we'll give it maybe 30 more seconds. I'm not sure if there's a lot of dots on the red shirt because people chose that or just because that's where the dots were to begin with.
I had it set up so the dots were around the outside.
Around the outside. Okay, so people have moved the dots. That's fantastic. Okay, give it maybe 10 more seconds. And can we get, Gigi's asking if we can reshare the link, please. Well, I'm happy to see that nobody's got steam coming out of their ears. We've got lots of happy people here. So I don't know if that's because you chose to come to this webinar because you're math people to begin with. I'm happy to see there's only one tears. But yeah, when I was doing my math specialist, we read a study that had looked at grade 2 students and their attitudes toward math at the beginning of the year and then again at the end of the year, and their teachers identified as either really enjoying teaching math or really not enjoying teaching math. And it made a massive difference on the students' learning by the end of the year based on a standardized test and also on self-reported attitudes of the students in their class. You know, they had grade 2 saying at the end of the year either that they really loved math or that they really didn't enjoy math. And the effect was particularly strong in girls. And so I always found that really disheartening because you hear sometimes parents and even teachers talking about how, you know, they don't have the math gene or, you know, she didn't get it from me. I was no good at math either, as if it was a fixed thing that you either inherit or don't inherit rather than a skill that you can learn. So the growth mindset, you know, you don't get a lot of teachers saying, oh, I hate reading. But for some reason, people feel comfortable, you know, announcing to their class that, you know, math isn't their favorite subject or, you know, saying, okay, guys, it's time for math, or folks, it's time for math. And no, I know, but we have to do it. And that attitude can really impact student success in math. So I'm happy to see that people are interested and excited about teaching math, because that's, you know, why we're all here. We're also here to, can we get the next slide maybe, to talk about how to take our students outside. And in this webinar, we're not going to focus too much on some of the barriers to taking students outside. We do acknowledge that there are barriers. We know that not every student comes to school dressed for the outdoors. We know that some administrations are more friendly towards taking students outside than others. We know that some communities have different ideas about the safety of the community and being outside and things like that. So we do acknowledge that there are real barriers in some cases. But again, just like the attitudes are important towards teaching math, I think teacher attitude towards going outside to learn is also really, really important. And if you're enthusiastic enough about it and you plan well, and you share your plans with teachers, students, parents, and your administrator, you should be able to find ways to overcome that, whether it's a lending library for clothing or things like that. There are definitely solutions. So we're not going to spend too much time talking about how to get our kids outside. We're going to spend more time during this webinar talking about what to do when you take your students outside. A lot of teachers will really easily do the art outside. You know, it lends itself really well to going outside and sketching and things like that. I know when I was in the classroom, I did a lot of literacy outside, a lot of reading outside. But I didn't, as a mathy, I didn't always take my math class outside. And so we're hoping to present some primary, some junior, some intermediate, and some senior ideas for taking your students outside. The next slide. So one of the great things, and I think this next slide is going to speak to it, one of the great things about the new math curriculum that came out in 2020 was that it highlighted the importance of social emotional learning. It's important across the strands, but particularly in math, where students sometimes, by the time they come to us, particularly when I had them in junior, already have an idea about themselves as math learners. So one of the things I like to do as a teacher right at the beginning of the year to sort of unpack my students' attitudes about doing math is this activity called If Math Were an Animal. And that's just a writing prompt that I put on the whiteboard, and they get a chance to just think about it. And the animals that they choose are sometimes really telling about how they feel. So if we can just maybe do this in the chat, if people want to write down quickly, if math were an animal, what animal it would be and why. And then maybe we could read, maybe Stephanie or Hillary, you could read some of the answers out as people post their ideas in the chat.
No answers yet.
No,
oh, got one. There you go. Sybil says it's a porcupine.
I love porcupines.
With the needles up, Sybil, or at rest with the needles smoothed down?
You know, I think it varies, right? I think sometimes the needles are up, and sometimes, you know, I just think it's complex.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
And
Nice.
Kristen says like a monkey, playful and clever. Sarah says a skunk. Eva says a whale, maybe because they're so huge, there's so many types, they can, it's flying fast now, the chat. And their songs are beautiful. Oh, that's lovely, Eva. Elise says carpenter ants, everything in building, building everything. Rosanna says math was an animal, it'd be a monkey. Monkeys are very curious, persistent animals, and that's my approach to math. Gigi agrees with that. Elise says a hedgehog. Sarah says a raccoon, because sometimes it can cause a bit of trouble, but it's very clever. That's a good response too. An elephant from Ellen. Yeah, lots of monkeys. The Biz, and maybe because Biz is a true dedicated outdoor person, math can be like a loon. It can sound haunting, but it's intricate and amazing once you know more. Oh, I love that answer. That's great. Lots more answers flowing in, but I'll pass it back to you, Laura.
I love it. Monkey is one that I used to get all the time as a student. I think I've got some examples on the next slide of ones that my students have done. Oh, there we go. So if math were an animal, it would be a hawk, because a hawk is clever. The student on the right was on a was a gifted exceptionality, and she always wrote quite a lot, but it would be a pig. And you really can get a sense, a lot of students say monkey because they're clever. They really think math is something that smart people do. I mean, it's for smart people that you get a lot of answers about, or you get sometimes owls. I used to get a lot of owls, again, because they're wise and clever and things. Some of my favorites are things like centipedes, because you can count on the legs and stuff. But you get a real sense of the students who say it's, you know, something kind of friendly, and then you get the ones that are like, you know, it's like a spider because, you know, it bites, and, you know, or it's a snake, and, you know, animals that sometimes get a little bit of a bad rap. So it was a fun way at the beginning of the year to get to know your students and their attitudes towards math, which can be so important in setting the stage for a successful math year. So I think the next slide is Rachel's. I think we're going to turn it over to Rachel. She's going to start, we're going to do a progression. So she's going to start in the early years in primary, and then we're going to move through the presenters all the way up to Stefanie in the secondary.
Thanks, Laura, for getting us started there. So in the primary grades, we're helping students develop their basic understanding of math, whether it's recognizing different symbols that are going to be used in math, or their mathematical language, or having this mental picture and images of math concepts. So demonstrating how they're going to utilize those concepts. So I've got a few activities that are going to help us maybe bring out some of those math concepts that primary students are starting to develop, and that can be then reviewed again later in older grade levels. I'm hoping to get some interaction with this first activity. I know we're all kind of at our desks at the end of the day, but if you're wanting to be a little bit of movement and interacting, this first activity is for you. So it's called the 1 meter challenge, and it's from the resource book called Messy Maths, A Playful Outdoor Approach by Juliet Robertson, and you can see the picture on your screen there. So the challenge with this activity is to create a line or an object that is exactly 1 meter long without using any sort of measurement tool, no rulers or measuring devices, and done outside with students so they can use natural materials to create their objects or lines. Now today, if you want to participate along with us as I go through the activity, you can use anything that's on your desk or in the room that you're situated in, and see if you can create something that is 1 meter long without actually measuring it as you go. I mean, we'll go to the next slide. And what I would do with my students is, once they've had a chance to explore the schoolyard, gather some natural materials, and create their 1 meter object, is then they'd have a chance to share. So on the next slide, we'll go through a few of those things there. And what I really like about this activity is that it opens up a lot of chances for asking open-ended questions with students, getting their critical thinking involved, and having a chance to share their ideas. Sorry, Stefanie, just go back one more. So with students outside, I would get them to pair up with a partner, and they would have a chance to share with each other or in a group how they created their 1 meter challenge, and think about what materials they've used, how did they know it was 1 meter long, or did they use any sort of problem solving strategies to figure that out. And that's what I'm trying to hope that a few of us might share. So if you were wanting to build something and have a chance to kind of look around the room and see what's available to you to build your 1 meter. I've got an example that I did ahead of time with things that I had nearby. So I found some scrap pieces of paper and I just clipped them together, and I thought, okay, that's about 1 meter. And I'm curious if anyone else built anything. If you did, you can type it in the chat of what you might have used or how you know it's 1 meter long. And the nice thing is that students get this chance to be creative and demonstrate their learning in multiple ways before they're sharing it. It's really open-ended activity. There's not a lot of instruction to it, but it allows us a good insight into their thinking behind the language of measurement and how they know what's going on. And it's this knowing that we're trying to work on developing with the primary students. And a lot of it can be done through some practical play-based learning outside. And so moving forward into our next few activities, we're going to take hold of some of those play-based ones. I see that Farah said that she used some pencils to create her 1 meter line, which is great. There's lots of different ideas. And the nice thing is that we build on this background knowledge. So this knowing, this understanding of how did you know it was 1 meter long? So for example, I use paper on my desk. I know that one sheet of paper is about 30 centimeters. And so I pieced together 3 and a bit pieces of paper to get roughly 1 meter. But that knowing, that understanding of those non-conventional units of measurement, that's what we're trying to help our students develop. So this is a great introductory to that, or a review for older students to check in with their understanding of some of those concepts. So we'll go into the next slide and take a look. I love the ideas that are being shared in the chat about using an inchworm to move, using wood chips or pine cones from the yard. Definitely a great activity that can be done completely outside with your students. So on the next slide, I'm going to share with another resource that I've used quite often. A few years ago, I had the pleasure of teaching kindergarten outdoor education to the entire school. So all the kindergarten classes would come see me a few times a week, and we would do some outdoor learning together. And this next resource is called I Wonder by K.A. Holt. It is a wonderful read aloud story. It's very whimsical and kind of silly to students. And it asks some questions and models, inquiry type questions like, I wonder if clouds have a taste, or I wonder if grasshoppers need to take hopping lessons, or I wonder if windmills ever get tired. So they're kind of silly, but they promote this sense of curiosity about the natural world, and also allow students to kind of think in multiple ways about different problems, or see the world in different ways. And so with students, I would often read the story with them before having a chance to go and explore the yard. And then we would come back and kind of see how their questions were evolving over the years. So you'll see on the side, I've written down some of the questions I used with one of the classes. I recorded what the students were sharing, and we would kind of go back to this throughout the year and relate it to other topics. So it was a great starter for math and problem solving and getting those critical thinking skills involved, but it was also a good link to some of the science curriculum that we were doing as well. The last resource I want to share with you is also from the Messy Maths book by Juliet Robertson. And it's this idea that we can utilize unstructured play opportunities outside that our students are having and examine it from a mathematical perspective. So we'll go to the next slide, and I've got a question for all of you to think about, and you can type your ideas in the chat. So the question being, how can the act of climbing across a log be perceived from a mathematical perspective? And if you've got any ideas of how we could view that activity of crawling across or walking across a log in the yard and how we can view it from a math perspective, you can share it in the chat. Showing about counting the number of steps that it takes to go across. You could think about estimation of will this log be strong enough to support me? There's some problem solving going on. Yeah, spatial sense and measurements, comparing what we see on the log as we go across. The problem solving of where should I step next? Are there certain areas that I want to avoid as I'm walking across the log? Will I fit between certain areas? So by observing our students when they're having some of this unstructured play can also connect to those math concepts. And by giving students prompts is another way to kind of refocus their ideas during their outdoor play or outdoor education. Speak aloud to what the students are doing. If they're acting out a math idea, or they're estimating, or they're checking, then improving on their idea, you can verbalize those things, and also asking your own I wonder statements to your students of, I wonder if you could try a simpler way, or I wonder if you can look for a pattern this time. There's lots of bring notice to it and light to it so that they can recognize that they already have those skills, and we can bring it back into what's being taught as a class. So that's it on the primary side. And as we move forward, we'll see how these ideas kind of evolve into the next set of grade levels.
Okay, so I most recently have been teaching intermediate, but I did quite a few years in the junior level. And the one thing I really like that Rachel touched on is it's sort of about the perspective of seeing math in everyday situations, in your space that you have in your schoolyard or in your community, and then finding a way to work the math or make obvious the math that students are doing that might not be at the forefront of their minds. I'm going to do with a little bit more of a traditional lesson for the juniors. And can I get the next slide, please? One of the things that I think some teachers rub up against is in the junior, if you're taking your kids outside, it can be maybe perceived as like, what are you doing? Like, where's the math in that sort of thing? Either by, sometimes it's admin, sometimes it's parents who want to see that sort of structured math lesson with lots of drill and lots of practice and things like that, depending on your community. So sometimes it's about explaining yourself and just being confident that there is really good math in what we're doing, and teasing that math out of your experiences outdoor. So things like measurement, how far can you jump? We've done one with, so I was going to skip to patterning and algebra, heart rate outside. So you might do their heart rate, just resting heart rate for 10 seconds, and then using patterning, what would that be for a minute, right? If you do 10 seconds and then you use the pattern, you can use a T-table to come up with what would your heart rate be for a minute. You can do jumping jacks, skipping, whatever, test it again for 10 seconds. And then, okay, well, based on that, you can do, again, the pattern using your T-table to figure out what my heart rate would be, you know, for a minute, that kind of thing. And there is real math in that. The idea of doing bio-blitzing, and I think Stefanie's going to talk a little bit more about bio-blitzing, combining your grade 6 biodiversity with your data management, right? And you can even do some measurement in there, finding, you know, the area of your schoolyard and then dividing it into smaller sample areas, taking tallies of the biodiversity using field guides or apps, you know, like to find the biodiversity in a certain area, maybe making a class master list, and then looking for change over time. Right, especially if the playground is being used a lot. If you do it in September, you know, where it's been maybe left all summer and things have started to come back. The pandemic would have been great from that, because I think the schoolyard was getting a lot more use than it ever did before. And then using that for data management, you could graph. When we were doing the heart rate, you could graph those equations if you're teaching grade 6, 7, and 8. If it's a linear pattern, right, you can take that linear pattern and you can graph it. So there really is a lot of math that is accessible outside. It's really just about taking that prompt, that question, whatever it was, that concept that you're going to do, and just think, okay, I could do this inside with my whatever pattern blocks. Could I do it outside with something else? And I know, especially with social distancing and doing everything we could to stay safe and healthy over the last couple of years, that a lot of teachers were looking for ways to take their students outside. And so that's my suggestion, is to just look for what you would use in the classroom and translate it into something that you could do outside. So I have a little sample lesson for you. I know when I taught, and everything from grade 4 to 8, Intro to algebra was always tricky, and it's starting in the new curriculum even as early as grade 3. And so it's been coming down a little bit. But I remember distinctively being in grade 7 when I was in school, and I was a really good math student up until grade 7. I think I missed a day or two, and suddenly I came back and there were letters in the math. And I just remember being completely, completely upset, like why suddenly are there letters in my math and what do they mean? And so I like to make a joke with the kids when I start teaching this. But I am going to read to you from my favorite book ever called Equal Schmeequal. But when I start it with students, what I start by saying, I'll put an equation up on the board with some letters in it, and they all go, I say, this is what we're doing today. And they go, doesn't make any sense. But then I say, you have been doing algebra since grade 1. You have. So tell me if you can't see this. But I'll say to students, do you remember this from grade 1? And they'll say, yeah, I said, okay, what goes in the apple? Because you all had worksheets like this in grade 1, right? And they'll say 2. I'm like, exactly, 2. And then maybe last year in grade 3, you had something that looked like this. Okay, what goes in the box? 2. And I use a really simple equation on purpose, really, really easy, so that A, there's an access point for everybody in the class, and B, it's almost kind of silly. Like, you guys know what goes there, right? And so you're talking to grade 5s or 6s, and they say, yeah, 2. You go, okay, so why all of a sudden, does this cause panic, right? It's the same as the apple that you did in grade 1. So that's one of the ways that I start talking about algebra. But you'll notice in a lot of cases now, before they get into this kind of thing, they'll use a balance model for, and as a side note, we did some, Eva's in the room, Eva Rendeck, and we did when I was at Donwood, we did a whole school sort of inquiry in math, and we found that the older the students were, the more confused they were about this, because they found that the equal sign, they thought that the answer goes here, right? And so it's unpacking the idea that the equal sign means that what's on the right-hand side and what's on the left-hand side of it are the same value. Doesn't necessarily look the same, but it's the same amount. And so that's why the balance scale has started to be thing. And that's why also when you're writing things, you should practice not always putting the answer there, right? It should be like 4 equals 2 plus blank, right? So that they don't get in the habit of thinking that, wherever the equal sign is, that there is an answer coming next kind of thing. But for the balance scale, and I have used this book with my big grade 8s, and they sit on the carpet and I read out loud to them and they shout at the book. So I'm going to read to you guys too. So this is Equal Schmeequal. Can I get thumbs up from people or their hands up on their screens if they have seen this book before? So this is I love math picture books, but this one is by far my favorite. I literally have read it to grade 4s and grade 8s. And the idea is there's a picnic in the forest, and the students all leave. They get back on their school bus. They go back to school, and they have left a rope for tug of war. And the animals, the woodland creatures, 100% for kindergarten. The woodland creatures are trying to play tug of war, but they want to make the teams fair. Okay, so I'm just going to jump right into the middle. So it says, Bobcat said, everyone with fur go to one side and everyone without fur go to the other. But that only left Turtle on a team. That couldn't be equal. Does anyone know what halves are? Rabbit asked. I heard the farmer talking about halves. Halves are what you get when you make 2 groups with the same number, Mouse said. We can't make halves because there are 5 of us. Just then, Mouse saw hooves behind a bush. Hey, she said, maybe Deer will want to play with us. Then we can make halves. And they go on trying different permutations of the woodland creatures. They go on to carnivores on one side and herbivores on the other. And they do a bunch of combos that don't work. And Bear is, you know, being Bear, and he keeps saying, equal schmequal, Bear exclaimed, finishing off the last piece of pizza. And then we come, I'm going to skip a bunch of pages, to Mouse. Mouse sat by herself and tried to think of a new idea. She tapped a tiny foot and twirled a wiry whisker. Listen, said Mouse. Listen up, she said. I have an idea. The animals stopped fighting. Well, asked Bobcat, what's your great idea? I thought that instead of equal numbers, she explained, our teams could have equal weights. We could use the seesaw to figure it out. So that's when, if you were outside with your students, you could do models. So I would read this outside, and then I would do a model of a seesaw, or a balance scale. And I'm going to do this really quick. Can somebody tell me if they can see my fabricated balance scale?
There we go. You're good.
Okay. All right. So shout it out. What would I need to put on the other side to balance my seesaw?
In the chat, I'm hearing more rocks.
Yes, more rocks. How many more rocks?
That one might be hard for us to see from the angle that you've got the camera at.
Is that better?
Yep. Eva says add 2 more. Elise says add 4 more.
Okay. I could add 2 more. And then I would have 5 and plus 2 plus 1. So I might have to do another group of.
Oh, Alan's asked a great question. But do all the rocks weigh the same?
Ah, that's a good question. So in this case, we're going to assume that they do. And sometimes when you're introducing with the balance scale, you would use letters like A plus A equals B. And that A would signify the 2 A's, that they are the same amount. But you could get students to do this outside. After you read the book, you could have them do it in the snow by drawing. You could have them do it with leaves if it's fall. You can use rocks, pine cones, anything. It also depends. We've got science people in the room. They want to talk about the distance from the fulcrum. We're just talking about making what's on the right-hand side of the equal sign and on the left hand the same amount. And so that's one that I would totally take outside, mostly because it's about a nice picnic, and it lends itself well to a nice read aloud and then some fun times. So I am out of time. I'm over time. I'm going to pass it over to Wesley, who's going to take us through the juniors into the intermediate.
That's right. Thank you, Laura. As mentioned, I'm an outdoor ed teacher, but prior to that, for 11 years, I was an intermediate teacher with an emphasis on math and science. Just go back one there. So the first thing that I'd like to do, and this is kind of geared towards intermediate teachers, but I also know that some of the challenges that we face as math teachers transcend divisions or grade levels. So I just wanted to pose a quick question. So feel free to turn on your mic and shout it out, or you can throw it into the chat. The question: what challenges do we face as intermediate teachers, or intermediate math teachers, but as math teachers in general? What are some of the common challenges that you see year after year that make teaching math a challenge? So again, you throw your answers in the chat. You can use your mic. Lack of engagement, that's a big one. I like that. Fixed mindset. Self-confidence. Students' needs are varied for sure, especially with class sizes right now, and over the last few years. Yeah, these are really great answers. Yeah, so these are all things that I saw in my class as well, and speak access to manipulatives, gender issues. Yeah. Other things for me, I always found, and this was a little bit more prior to the new curriculum, as Laura was talking about, trying to wrap their head around this idea of algebra or letters being in our equations, these kind of abstract concepts. But as a few of you have pointed out to, specifically in the intermediate level, one of the biggest challenges that I faced, and I'm sure many of you have as well, is student engagement. How can we make math more enjoyable? And if I could just add a little bit onto that, how can we make math more enjoyable without the use of a screen? So this is something that can be a little bit tricky, but in my experience, taking kids outside is a great way to engage students with any type of curriculum, but with specifically in the maths. So the activity that I'm going to present today is really just a jumping off point. It's not set in stone. It's geared toward intermediate teachers, but there's absolutely no reason why this can't be modified for younger grades, older grades. It's meant as a modifiable lesson that you can do with your class, and it's takes place largely outside. You can see we're going to be looking at a fort building activity. Great to do in the winter, definitely possible to do in any other season, and all it takes is a little bit of creativity. This could be done with milk crates. This could be done with fallen branches. Really, you're only limited by your own creativity. So next slide. So we're going to be building a fort, a snow fort. So just wait on that next slide. So as outdoor ed teachers, we commonly like to give scenarios to things. So if we're doing something, we like to provide a scenario, and this is depending on where you want this to go. This could be a survival scenario. Maybe you want to tie it in with literacy. One of the books that I like, although it is a little bit outdated, is Hatchet by Gary Paulson, and one of the sequels, Brian's Winter. So there's just a couple of things that will be useful in doing this activity. So one of the key things here, if you are going to do it in the winter, are things, buckets or plastic bins. And really around a school, the world is kind of your oyster. Garbage bins, recycling bins, 5-gallon buckets, doesn't really matter. Will be really helpful. Meter sticks and or a trundle will be really useful. And if you don't know what a trundle is, it's just pictured down there in the bottom. I'm sorry if I'm going a little fast. I just want to make sure that we have enough time by the end for some questions. So next slide here, Steph. So this might look like a kind of a challenge. So a group challenge, something like we need to create a fort or a structure with a designated area. Could be perimeter, could be volume, again, modify to suit your needs. So in this example, we'll use an example. So we need to create a structure of 12 meters squared. This may be for a grade 6 class. Design must include one rectangle. Grade 7, maybe it needs to include a circle. Grade 8, maybe it needs to be a composite shape. So students you can do this inside or outside. Students are then kind of set to the task of coming up with some designs. I really like giving students an opportunity to work independently before getting together as a group, so that they all, everybody come up with 3 designs or as many designs as you can, and then kind of get together in a think, pair, share kind of mentality. For this it would be useful. Next slide, please, Steph. Using a geoboard, especially for the rectangles or triangles or composite shapes. It's a little bit tricky with circles. I've got just a little example on the next slide of using a virtual geoboard that I like to use in the classroom. There's a link in my resources section. But I think, yeah, so you have an idea there what some possible answers might look like. So students can get together with their group, decide what they want to look like. And again, depending on how in-depth you want this task to be, there might be some function. It needs to have 2 entrances, or it needs to have this. If you want to just kind of keep it basic, just the area or perimeter volume. Next, it's time to get outside, and this is really, this is where the fun is, and activities like this, students they eat this stuff up, and it's almost like the saying, if you like what you do, you don't work a day in your life. They almost don't know that they're doing math. I've kind of described a process here called sintering. So you might think that building with wet snow would work best, but it actually becomes really difficult because the snow is really it's really heavy. So a good alternative to that, and it works well in any snow, but dry snow works really well, is a process called sintering. And Laura's commenting in the section there about some of the connections, and there's really good connections to a lot of different curricula with an activity like this. So sintering is just a process whereby heat and pressure work to form bonds below a melting point of a substance. So great for the grade 7 pure substances and mixtures, or the grade 8 fluids. So, and all sintering looks like in a snow situation is packing buckets or your bins as full as you can, compacting, and letting it sit for a couple of hours. This process binds it, and then you are left with building blocks of a really lightweight but easily workable material. I've left some resources in a couple of slides to give you a better idea what that process looks like. In a situation where you have wet snow, there's also another opportunity for so there are some possibilities for quincy, which is basically just a snow mound that is hollowed out. So depending on what your time looks like and how much you want to do this. So I really like this activity because you can really take it anyway. There's many directions that you can take this. There's multiple math extensions, volume calculations, ratio and scale drawings, perspectives, literacy and media, as I mentioned, tying into maybe some of your readings, or a final assignment, a process or a photo collage or poster. Social studies, the connections to igloos and quincies as a way of surviving in Indigenous cultures. So sorry if that went a little bit quick, but feel free to check out some of the links there, and I'll quickly pass it on to Steph.
Hey, hi everyone. I do apologize. I suspect that there's a little bit of a lag between what I'm seeing and what the presenters may be seeing. So I'm just going to take a moment or two to draw your attention to the Outdoor Education Schools Get Outside Month resources. And the lessons that I was anticipating to share for intermediate and senior students can be found here in our May 2022, which is focusing on math, and also some interdisciplinary things that can be found in the previous years. So for example, climate change in May of 2020 has a tree measuring activity that in the interest of time, I'm just going to leave that here and show you where you can find this. So we'll make sure that everybody has this website and resource. And there's so many ways to connect the math to the intermediate and senior connections. And I did want to also share that there are, in addition to the TOES resources, that OISE does have Ron Lancaster as well, the math trails, and he has shared selections of questions that people can take starting in and around the path system at Union Station. And it is an incredible set of questions that brings math to life. I remember when I started my career and I saw math on my timetable, a colleague and I brought our students on this math trail, and it was absolutely an incredible way to build confidence in math, to find relevance in a lot of the things that you see every day that links to the intermediate and senior curriculums. It's incredible. So this is all linked for you as well. Ron Lancaster recommends the math curse read aloud, which is linked in the presentation. And also there are many ways for us to link data management and data analysis to the lived experiences of students in Toronto. And if you'd like to go back and watch the previous webinar on environmental racism, you can start with the first recording by Sylvia and Aaliyah, and the geography and data analysis using ArcGIS can be found in the second recording link. So I'll end here just so that we're making sure that we are on time. So thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. What a fantastic, great collection of wonderful math ideas for all ages, which is fantastic to see. And I can see how not only would they work outside the classroom using the natural world as the basis, but you could also bring elements of those inside the classroom with bringing those pine cones or sticks or whatever the children are working with, natural items back into your classroom if the weather is really inclement as well. So we've just got a couple of minutes for if anybody would like to ask any questions, pop them in the chat and we would be happy to take those questions and give them to the team if you have any, or if you have any ideas that you've been working on yourself as well, pop those ones in the chat. I'm sure the TOES team would love to hear about those as well. So any questions we can answer for you?
We must have been thorough.
Maybe, Wes. Yeah, maybe. Wes, I can see how you might have been a really super popular intermediate teacher if you were taking your students outside to do math through building natural structures. I would have loved that as a child. It would have been really so much fun.
Well, and it's, you know, just absolutely, but it's all, you know, just from a survival perspective in that environment where it can be challenging to get engagement, right? So it's good for teachers too.
Well, I have launched the feedback poll just now. So if you can just take 2 seconds to let us know whether or not your learning needs were met in this webinar. We're always open to you popping into the chat, either more webinars like this one, or if you have other topics that you'd like to see us cover in future, that would be great too. I'm just taking a look from in the chat in terms of questions. Lots of compliments for the TOES team about how much they've enjoyed this webinar. Tanya asks about documentation for student achievement when using outdoors. What do you recommend? Does one of the TOES team want to deal with that? Oh, Laura, just put your microphone on. Can't hear you. Pretty sure you're answering that.
Yeah, sorry, I muted myself because it was kind of noisy here. There was vacuuming going on and I forgot. I was saying iPads, pedagogical documentation using your iPad is a great thing. You can snap photos of what the kids are working. If they're using chart paper and they've made something outside, you can record their voices. You can put a folder on it for each of your students on your iPad. And so then if they're explaining, or you can even have them do it and send it to you later, if they are explaining their thinking for a certain model that they created, for example, they can record a 30-second little clip and send it to you. And then it makes interviewing easier too, because you have all of your pictures, you have their sound, you might have images of their work. And you can keep it like that. I was just getting into that when I left the classroom, but if I was still in the classroom, yeah. So Rocketbook, Rachel is recommending great paper to electronic recording device as well. Yeah, I think an iPad is your friend, or however you want to do it in terms of pedagogical documentation outside. It's a great way to do it, and inside too, right? You snap pictures of all their projects, you have them record their voice over it, and then you save it in their folder, and you have all of your information there for that student.
Thank you. And Rachel's recommended Rocketbook. I don't know, Rachel, if you want to speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, it acts like a paper, lined paper notebook. That's what I used my I Wonder questions that I posted in their presentations. You can write on it like pen and paper, and then it actually comes with an app that you can take a photo of it, and you can designate what Google Drive you want to send it to, what folder on your computer, and it will automatically get sent there once you've scanned it onto your device. So it was really helpful for keeping those notes if you're a pen and paper type of person, but then easily transferring it to any electronic resources that you needed for later.
Thank you. And George has recommended Keynote in iPad for the same kind of purpose. David Hucker-Budlowski has also recommended that we can conference with students to capture the process as well, which is a great idea, especially when they're in the excitement and the flow of learning. Wouldn't that be wonderful to be able to share that little video clip with their parents as part of a parent-teacher interview later on in the term, for those parents who might think that their kids aren't excited about math at all? Well, look at them when they're outside learning about math, and they absolutely are. Thanks, Gail, for the suggestion too to use the Brightspace portfolio system. And I've been using the Seesaw portfolio system to great effect, even with adults. So I think that can also work. So I'm sensitive about time. We try to end right on time at 5 o'clock. Huge thank you if you can join me in giving a round of applause to our 4 members, Stefanie, Laura, Rachel, and Wes from the TOES team. We appreciate you putting this webinar together for us, on top of all of the amazing things that you do in the outdoor ed centers in the first case. And I just want to do a very quick share of screen just to let you know what's coming up. If you are an EcoSchools teacher or an AQ alumni, expect to be getting an invitation from us very shortly. We've got the Cultivating Connections, a very special year-end event coming up at Don Mills Collegiate Institute, which is going to be quite astounding to see their amazing school garden there. So expecting to see that one hit your email box. And if you get that invitation, please do reply quickly, because we've got very limited spots for it this year. And also just a general welcome again to the AQ courses in environmental and sustainability ed offered at OISE in partnership with the TDSB. Amazing instructors, both this year it'll be online learning. So if you're planning to learn from the cottage, that can work for you this year, as long as you got a Wi-Fi connection. That's all you really need. We will send out the links to these, as well as to the archive of the TDSB webinars as part of the resources that will come as part of this follow-up, and the recording to this as well. This is our last webinar for the year, and we've been so pleased to welcome all of you to these webinars this year. We will be doing more webinars, and maybe, if we're lucky, some in-person learning events come the fall as well. Let's all keep our fingers crossed that is possible once again, but I think we will always be offering hybrid moving forward. So wherever you are at, you can still attend these events, either in person or online. You'll have a choice moving forward. So thank you again to the TOES team. Terrific webinar. Thanks to all of you who attended. We really appreciate your time today and your engagement.